order. The Acushnet Board of Health on Monday, March 15th. We're running late. We're starting at 5:15. Is there a motion to open the meeting?
Motion to open the meeting.
Is there a second? Gotcha, Bob. I see your two fingers. So there's a motion, a second. Roll call vote, Mr. Fortin.
Yes.
Bob? Bob's a yes, and I am a yes. We are now on open session. First item on the agenda. I'm reading from my phone because I didn't print out the agenda, so it'll work hard. 45 Gammons Road. If I have the address correctly, or 48 Gammons Road. I'm sorry. So this is a continued public hearing for a septic system upgrade. Do I have the right address?
45 again.
45 Gammon.
Okay, so the house across the street is 48?
Yes,
Yep.
that's the well we tested.
Okay. So I'll go to Joe on the water test results. I looked at them and I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, particularly for coliform count.
Yep. No, everything was good.
I mean, it looks like there's some hardness and whatnot, but you know, normal conditions for well water.
Yep. I think.
So that's good. So there's no pollution going on now, and this should improve existing conditions with this upgrade because we are taking a septic system which is located in the groundwater and now placing it at least 3 feet above groundwater. And we're improving on the setback as well. Does anybody else want to add anything as far as board members? Bob's all set. Tom? Tom, are you with me?
I think he's frozen.
Yeah, ask him again. I know we're experiencing some technical difficulties all around, so I know Tom keeps freezing up a little bit. Did you get that, Tom?
I didn't get that.
Well, the well water analysis came back good. There's no coliform counts that are up or anything that would indicate the well water is not good for drinking purposes. So with that being said, I said that this would improve existing conditions because we're taking a leaching pit system in the water table and replacing it with a shallow leaching field 3 feet above the water table. We're improving on the setback from the abutting well from what exists today. So this should be a tremendous improvement. And we certainly shouldn't be going in the opposite direction. If the well water is good now, it certainly won't be polluted from an improvement of what's proposed. So if I wanted to know if any board members had anything else to say with the matter before I go to the abutters. So do you have any?
No, I don't have anything. No, I agree with what you just said, Dave. I'm good with that. If Bob's all set.
With that, I'll go to the abutters. Sarah, do you have anything you want to add or ask? Or
No, not really. I mean, there's not, I feel like everybody's hands are really tied in the situation, and it's kind of the situation it is, and you're trying to make the best out of it. I mean, I want it necessarily for my sake, just because of, you know, I understand the well water tested fine. I'm just one of those people that like to follow by codes if I can. And I understand this is a different situation, but I mean, it is what it is, really.
and I understand. I'm glad we went through the process of testing the well water. It gives me peace of mind to allow the variance to proceed. If it did come back, say it was marginal from a coliform count, the only thing we could do in the situation is make them put in a denitrification system to purify the water. It's quite an added expense, and since there's nothing out of the ordinary with your well water test, as well as the well water test for the property that has the upgrade going on, then it doesn't meet the threshold to warrant them to do that. So with that being said, if there's nothing more anybody wants to add, I'll entertain a motion to approve the plan and the variances as submitted and discussed at the prior 2 public hearings.
I'll make that motion, Dave.
Is there a second? Mr. Maderas has seconded the motion. Roll call vote. Mr. Fortin,
Yes,
Mr. Maderas? And I am a yes. So that's a unanimous decision, 3-0, to approve the plan and the variances. Thank you all for your patience. I'm glad it worked out in the end as far as the well water test. Wouldn't want to deal with it if it was the other way around.
Right. Hey, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
thank you.
All right, so next on the list, on our agenda, we have draft of the Board of Health soil removal regulations. Review of matters presented, votes may be taken. The board members received the draft of regulations. I think I'll turn it over to Pat to run us through the regulations, and then we can go to questions after that.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
The
Perfect.
regulation? Okay. So this is really an air pollution regulation being, I guess, enforced for all soil removal operations, not just gravel pits and quarries. This would be for large scale projects. We have a lot of solar fields coming up in town. They clear all of these parcels all at one time. They are subject to dust and other impacts similar to our gravel pits. So this was a good time to bring this online. Starting at the top, the Board of Health has the authority under Chapter 111, Section 31 and 31C to make its own regulations. DEP's regulations are the minimum requirements, and we have the right to be more protective than the minimum that DEP sets, but not unreasonable. The purpose of it is to keep soil removal operations and other site operations from causing fugitive dust to the atmosphere, risking contamination to local water sources and drinking wells, posing risks to public health, safety, and welfare. It's intended to protect the public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, to ensure that soil removal activities in the town of Acushnet follow appropriate notification and approval procedures through the Board of Health. And although the selectmen have their own soil board and permit, they really can't address some of the areas that the Board of Health can. And this serves to bolster that situation. So it says here, the regulations are not intended to duplicate the DEP regulations, but are implemented pursuant to our authority granted under the Mass General laws. For the administration of it, the Board of Health is going to administer it, implement it, and enforce it. The Board of Health can give duties under the regulation to its employees or agents or basically anybody else they want to do, engineers, whatever. And the Board of Health is responsible for deciding the meaning or intent of any of the provisions. So if something's unclear, it's up to the Board of Health to clarify it. And what the Board of Health decides is what stands. We've added some more specific definitions than the town's soil board has. And these definitions go hand in hand with a dust training class that I took from the state of California. They have some pretty good dust regulations, and they have what are called dust managers and dust inspectors. And being able to use some of this terminology in our permit will make it that much easier to keep things well defined and leave little room for wiggle from the contractors. So it describes bulk material, which is aggregate in every shape, manner, and form, and just covered every description so that someone can't say that a rock isn't a rock or gravel isn't gravel, in their opinion. The bigger issue here in the definitions is the disturbed surface area. This last paragraph right here. A A lot of the problems with dust off of these big projects, including the solar fields, is going to be based on how much of the surface area they disturb at one time. And that's what contributes to the fugitive dust. So this is a very good definition of what disturbed surface area means. This is taken right out of the California regulations and the dust training that I took. It goes on to explain what types of dust suppressants are, not just water, there are other items. It describes earth moving activities. The current soil board definition of earth removal is not disturbing the surface or taking the dirt or rock out of the ground. It's actually physically leaving the property is considered earth removal. So right now, we can't prevent anyone from creating fugitive dust from just pushing dirt around their property and doing what they want to regrade it, similar to a solar field. And this gives us the opportunity to regulate that. There's a definition of a dust control supervisor. It's recommended that there's someone working on these sites that has the ability to make a decision right then and there when there's a problem. And they would have possibly taken a dust control course and be a certified dust control supervisor. There's a definition of fugitive dust. That's been missing from any of our air pollution regulations. DEP says it can't go beyond the property line, but they don't say anything after that. Definition for high wind conditions. This particular is 20 miles per hour. Inactive disturbed surface area would be areas that have been dug up and disturbed, but they're not being worked on for the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 10 weeks, 20 weeks. And there may be some requirements based on what you give for a permit on how much inactive disturbed surface area can remain on a site, because that leads to fugitive dust as well. The size of the operations, the 70-acre solar fields and 40-acre gravel pits and things bigger than that, we needed a definition of what that was, because the requirements are a little stricter for a large operation than they would be for someone who's, disturbing 5,000 square feet somewhere. So we gave a definition of fill, we gave a definition of soil, and we included a definition of what soil removal means. It's not when it passes over a scale and a ticket gets printed. It's when you physically disturb the earth and move dirt around. There may be need to use licensed site professionals on some of these projects. So there's a definition of an LSP. There's a definition of what stockpiles and open storage piles are. Property line, PM10. And PM10 is the size of dust, the aerodynamic diameter, and this goes down to 10 microns. And that's actually smaller than the diameter of a human hair. And that would be considered respirable dust. And then a better definition of the water table, and adding a piezometer rather than just a test pit. A piezometer is something you can go back to year after year and check water tables and just confirm everything a lot more accurately. Section 5 is prohibited activities. Basically, no one's going to be allowed to cause emissions of fugitive dust from any active operation, an open storage pile, or a disturbed surface area. And that's why those definitions are so important. And that's that the dust remains visible in the atmosphere or on any surface beyond the property line of the emission source. So neighbors are being affected by dust. Dust blows off of Wing Lane and gets onto people's cars from the solar project over there. Gravel pits, quarries, same thing. But it's important that the dust remains visible on any surface. We have dust showing up on everybody's houses, cars, and windows, but it's really not measurable other than being visible. So that's why that's there. And then the standard requirement not to remove soil within 4 feet of the water table. in section 6, permits are required. And this says existing or prospective large operations in the town of Acushnet are prohibited unless a written permit is obtained from the Board of Health. So no one's grandfathered from this regulation. Health regulations don't allow people to pollute the air and only enforce against the next people who come along and want to do these activities. So this would cover existing operations in town that are either large operations and would need a permit. The application for the permit's pretty straightforward. The only difference here is we're looking for a little bit of tighter information. We want a topo. If any material is submitted to DEP for a special permit, we want to know about that before DEP issues a special permit without the Board of Health knowing. So anything submitted to DEP would be required to be supplied to the Board of Health in advance. The Board of Health has the right to ask for extensions, renewals, to change the form of the initial application. And basically the board can require additional information as they deem necessary. On C, the all soil removal activities that exist as of the effective date of this regulation have to apply for a permit within 60 days of the effective date of this regulation. There's a provision for third-party review for peer review under 53G. You can hire a licensed site professional. We can hire a professional engineer. They can review the submittals at the cost of the applicant. Any appeal of the Board of Health selection of a professional engineer or a licensed site professional is appealable under General Law 44, 53G, and what that boils down to is that's appealable to the Board of Selectmen. That's who would make that decision. The procedure for issuing the permit, within 45 days of getting a complete application, a public hearing has to be convened. The word shall is there. The notice of the hearing is not less than 7 days prior to the hearing. Duly posted, just so we do our meetings. And a written notice by certified mail to all parties in interest. And that would be the abutters to the property. And this is all at the applicant's expense. The board can continue the hearing as much as it wants to receive any other information or to ask questions and seek that information from the applicant. After the board closes the public hearing, they have 30 days, and that's a shall, to issue a written decision and file the same with the town clerk. And in every case, in every application, it's the applicant's burden to demonstrate that the proposed soil removal will not adversely impact the public's health. It's not up to the town to prove that it will do something. It's up to the applicant to prove that it's okay. And the board can deny a permit if the applicant fails to supply adequate materials to evaluate the project, or if the removal activities are determined to adversely impact the public's health. That's the call of the Board of Health. There's specific conditions and volume of soil, exact location of the removal on the property, the frequency of removal, the nature and composition of the soil or fill, just what it is. Is it loam? Is it peat? Is it rock? What is it? Monitoring requirements for the board's agent or engineer or LSP. Requirements for the testing of any soil that might be brought into that project from another site, so that we don't wind up with contaminated soil coming from another town into a site here because they got a good deal on it and they didn't have to buy clean fill. So the board would be able to set requirements for the testing of imported fill if that was part of the project. Submissions of status reports, testing logs, anything that the town needs and the board needs to evaluate the soil activities. And then requirements for the proper reclamation or restoration of the property. And this is a really important part. Because after one of these operations ends, if they don't vegetate it properly, if they don't finish the job properly, it's going to be nuisance dust for years and years and years. And that's what this is all about, is to avoid that situation. There are some tables of requirements for large operations. Table 1 is for regular land disturbance, solar field, small scale gravel pit. Tells you what to do if you encounter conditions that you've got wind blowing and it's dusty and your normal controls aren't working, that there's another control that's suggested. If that doesn't work, there's another control after that that's suggested. And the final one, if it's not working, is stop working. Some people have trouble making that determination, so it's here in the regulation. And then there's a bond to ensure compliance with all the conditions and the approvals. And the board can take into consideration any existing security that the town already holds. So if somebody has a soil removal permit and they've bonded it, the Board of Health doesn't necessarily want to double down on that bond. As long as the town has adequate surety somewhere, the board can decide whether to accept that or not. But if they feel that it should be more, they could increase the amount of the bond. And then the duration of the permit, every permit not to exceed 1 year. There's no automatic renewal, or if you're a good boy, you can bypass the next public hearing. It does require a hearing every year. Permit revocation. You can revoke the permit at any time after a public hearing in the event of any non-compliance, period. You can do whatever you want to do. You can suspend, you can revoke, you can penalize, you can give warnings, but you do have the right at any time after a public hearing to revoke for non-compliance. And then permit fees. So in here, the permit fee is $1,000 per acre of disturbed surface area. And the reason they do this is to give contractors an incentive to minimize the amount of disturbed surface area, to minimize their permit costs. And at the same time, they reduce the probability of nuisance dust and fugitive dust getting beyond the property line because they have too big of a disturbed area open. So rather than rip that whole solar field open or rip that whole gravel pit open and expose 10 acres for 10 years, they really could work at a couple acres at a time and save some money on permit fees. Penalties. This all follows Mass General Law, same as all the other non-criminal disposition penalties in town. Each day that there's a violation or the violation continues is a separate offense and would be a separate penalty. And the penalty for violations of any provision of this regulation or condition is $300 for each offense. So if you have someone who's causing fugitive dust problems and it takes them 10 days to get their act together and they don't cooperate, they would pick up $3,000 in fines. If they're doing what you want them to do, if they're trying, if it's really not their problem, if we had a 70-mile-an-hour wind that day, you don't have to give them the fine. You can use judgment on this. But for the repeat offender, you finally have the ability to do more than a $50 fine. And that is the maximum allowed currently in the state. And then any provision of this Board of Health regulation is severable, whatever that means. And if any provision of the application thereof to any person or circumstance is held invalid, it doesn't affect the other provisions. It doesn't wipe out the entire regulation. Just whatever that provision is that isn't up to par is unenforceable. This was done with the benefit of town council and myself. This is the table for a regular size project. and there's a requirement to maintain moisture content in stockpiles. And if soil is extra dry and you're going to dig it up on a windy day, you need to adjust the moisture content so it doesn't blow away as you're digging it up. It's all common sense stuff. These regulations have been adopted in about 11 states, and everybody really liked the California regulations, but we took a lot of the overboard. I mean, they get right down to the nitty gritty in California. We don't have as many droughts and arid conditions as they have. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. So, the recommendations for control actions are, water the roads. If you have a problem with open storage piles, apply stabilizers or add water or install a temporary covering or put a 3-sided enclosure or any other control measure approved by the Board of Health. It's all common sense things. So what we would need to do next is publish an advertisement in the newspaper that the Board of Health is considering this regulation. This is the application that Town Council came up with. After this ran in the newspaper for, I believe, 14 days, the Board of Health could have a public meeting and discuss this application, this regulation publicly. And at the end of that meeting, you could vote, or you could amend it and have another meeting and vote to approve it. And then it would be submitted to DEP because this is an air pollution regulation. DEP has to approve it. It can't be ridiculous. It has to be reasonable. And all this does really is regulate dust beyond the property line. That's other than what DEP does. This is the only extra little bit of strength that we get and a clear definition of what fugitive dust is beyond the property line. Any questions?
Okay, Pat, clarify for me, what is I'm still not clear as to the threshold for an entity to have to apply to the Board of Health. For instance,
okay, yeah.
We have solar farms that are proposed in open fields. No clear cutting is required. And literally some of these can be done without any land disturbance other than building a gravel road around the site. And they might create some areas where they just ruin the existing grass field from the construction activity. But what would cause them to have to get a permit with us if they're not really turning over soil?
If they were going to remove more than 15,000 yards of soil in a year, I'm trying to find the language for you right now.
Right. Well, what I read was the definition of a large operation, which it looked to me like 15,000 cubic yards of material for a certain acreage.
50 or more acres.
Okay, so most of the solar farms probably wouldn't trigger anything near that because they try to minimize they certainly don't want to bring in 15,000 cubic yards of fill. Or take out. Really comes down to, even if you did a cut and fill, if you cut 7,500 and rolled it to the other side of the hill and filled it, but they can build these things on the hill. So they're really looking to minimize, other than clear cut woods. They may clear cut 10 acres of woods or 20 acres of woods, but it's going to be pretty tough for them to ever get to those two thresholds.
That's true.
They're not removing that amount of soil. So how
but
does that come under
it doesn't come under
jurisdiction?
the 50 acres is a placeholder. So if you feel as a board that you want to regulate just moving the soil and disturbing the soil on a site of 25 acres or less, or disturbing 20 acres or less, or 15 acres or less, that's your call. But if you feel that it's not that important until you get to the 50 acre, benchmark, then you could let that stay. But it's your call on how many acres of basically vegetation disturbed, stripped land open at one time without requiring a permit from the Board of Health.
What I'd like to know, Pat, if you could study the solar farms that have been approved thus far and those that are in the works.
Yeah.
What the average, what's the low and the high for the size of what they're proposing? I mean, I don't think any of them are gargantuan, but there were a couple lately that were pretty big. They seem to be getting bigger and bigger.
So Morse's Lane is 70 acres.
70, okay.
Yeah.
What about Wing Lane? That's a pretty large area that they just stripped.
That's a
And,
great. I think that's just about ready to wrap up. But the other ones are white.
One side is, and then there's an opposite side that they're working on now. And
Yeah, but that's already been stripped, cleared, and you won't have this passed.
right.
You won't have this passed for that.
Right. So permitting for that is, so it's actually stripping topsoil pretty much. Because they're not going any lower. That what they're doing is taking off the topsoil and then opening up, the property in order to be able to, correct?
On that particular project, yes.
On most of the projects that they do with solar, that's pretty much what they do. So they're going to clear the property of trees or whatever, and it's basically in the fields, and you're taking off topsoil. So you're taking off 2 feet of topsoil, and you're getting down to some gravel or whatever. How are we going to control that? Does that still come under this type of regulation?
If it meets the criteria, if it's over the 50 acres or over the 30 acres, there's 2 other solar fields that are in the 30-acre range coming up that are in permitting now. It's wherever you want to be. I mean, I don't think you need to go any smaller than 30 acres. But if something's open at 50, you want a permit. And my experience, Tom, is with all these solar fields, there are cuts and fills. They're not all just flat fields. And some of them are just really tough, undevelopable terrain. And it's worth someone's while to go in there and make it work. And that's where I've seen the big trouble. And the permittee is not necessarily the person building it. These are put out to bid. These are out-of-state contractors. They come to town. They didn't negotiate the conditions and terms the job was going to be done. And they have one thing on their mind: get in and get out. And they rip the place apart.
Right. No, I agree with that. And I'm just trying to put it in perspective as far as, okay, we're going to go in and we're going to strip this piece of property. We're going down 2 feet or 3 feet or whatever it is. And then what they do when they're doing these types of solar farms or whatever you want to call them, they're bringing back the topsoil and replanting around this area. Most of the time, that's what they do.
That's what they tell you they're doing, right? But a lot of times,
and I agree with that. And I'm just trying to explain the way I feel about it, and to the rest of the board members that I agree with this. And they should definitely have a permit. There's no doubt.
I'm more in favor with 30 acres than 50 acres. 50 that's a pretty
high
large,
bar. Yep.
that's a pretty large threshold.
Yep.
That's why I'm just curious. I mean, 30 acres is it's a pretty good area.
I mean, even 20 acres is a big area.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be just, curious as to if you could just come back with the numbers on what we're looking at. We're right about whatever's passed and under construction. Obviously, we can't do anything about it unless there's dust complaints, and then we can still do something about it. But
Right.
If there are a lot of them in motion that we can maybe implement this, then it makes sense to try.
Yep.
Because there is no oversight from what I can tell. Once they get their permits, they're free to do what they want.
They're off to the races.
Off to the races. Okay. The abutter notifications or
Thanks.
section 9 procedure for issuing a permit.
Hey, Dave,
Yeah, please go ahead.
can I just back up a little bit before you go too far?
Yep.
What is the reason Tommy was saying that they're excavating 2 feet of topsoil out? What's the reason for the 2 feet?
Oh, I think he's just making an assumption, Bob, because a lot of these fields, I would think they're just turning over the top so they can get rid of the vegetation and start scratch,
Well, yeah, that's what I meant. I mean, I
Oh, okay.
wasn't sure.
When
on
you say-
what-
when you-
Yeah, but most of them, in other words, they're taking off the topsoil, and in those areas, actually, and I'm basically pointing out the ones in the Wing Lane area on both sides. That was huge farmland with probably, a good 1.5 or 2 feet of topsoil that they excavated out of there. And then stockpiled it and used it to bring it back in and recover once they were finished completing the installation of the solar panels. If you go down, I've been that way. And if you go down and you look on that, would be the west side of Wing Lane, and you look at that was all of that topsoil was spread back. So in other words, they took off 1.5 feet of topsoil. Those were huge. That was all huge farmland. So that's my point. So they're going to strip all that down. They're going to do this with every solar panel farm. You're with the big ones, actually, with most of them, actually, with any of them, whether they're 20 acres, 30 acres, or 5 acres, whatever it is, they're stripping it down so that they can get to somewhere that they can run the base of those frames to hold those panels, and then come back and respread the topsoil. So what they're doing is a good thing, because that's, they're reusing topsoil, hopefully. But my point is that's pretty much what they're doing. They're not taking out 10 feet of soil. That's, you know what I'm saying?
It's not about taking it out. It's about disturbing it as far as the air pollution regulation.
Right.
Taking it out would be soil removal.
What I was concerned about, if they were stripping out the soils there, 2 feet of it and getting rid of it, you're taking the heart of the land away. Without the topsoils there, the land is worth nothing.
Correct.
I mean, if they're only scraping the soil out to get a base and then putting that soils back and not removing it off the site itself, no problem. Like Pat says, we're going to have to make sure that summer's coming, and when they're doing that procedure, it's going to get very dusty if you're stripping 50 acres of land. That's extremely a lot of acres, like Dave says. 30 acres, well, even 25 acres is a lot of acres of land to be stripped at one time.
So, Bob, you make me think that
when you're up
something
there,
missing, Bob. Based on your comment, something that's missing is, I believe we would have the right to restrict the removal of the loom from the site.
absolutely,
That the loom needs to stay on the site.
absolutely.
Right. That was my point. So,
Okay.
and
We
I
can add
believe
that.
that's what they did on that west side of Wing Lane. And from what I could see, because I've been down that way quite a bit, and what I could see is that topsoil was put back. So I don't know if that should be part of, maybe part of some type of a restriction that they cannot remove the topsoil. It has to be put back, because most of these solar farms are done in all of the old fields and farming areas that had 2 feet of topsoil or 1.5 feet of topsoil. which should not be removed, it should be put back. So
We have a-
that's basically my point. I realize that you're gonna have to deal with the dust control while they're constructing these projects. And, yeah, we need to follow through with that. And they need to follow through with how they're gonna control that, which is pretty difficult.
We have 11 large-scale solar fields where I live, and I was involved in the permitting on all of them and the enforcement on every landslide and washout they had after a 100-year storm, the week after they cleared 50 acres of land. So I've seen the effects of all of that, and that's part of why this is here. The town does have a requirement in their earth removal bylaw that you can't take the loom off the job, but they haven't been successful in enforcing that. So
So my other point is, so if you had a 5-acre parcel and you cleared that area and you had, a development in that area where they're doing this, that should be controlled also. 5 acres, 30 acres, 50 acres. I
so
think that should all be on a-
so maybe the loom article says that the loom couldn't be removed from the site without permission from the Board of Health. So on a case-by-case basis, if they could show you a surplus on a housing development that they've got, 5,000 yards of loom left over, you could give them permission to take that loom off site.
With a permit. They're gonna require a permit to remove off-site.
Yeah,
That's what the soil board was all about, that if you had a pit and you were removing the soil, you can move that soil any ways you want in a pit. But if you remove that off that site into another site, you'd have to have a special permit for that.
yeah. So I'll make that adjustment.
There's a balancing act though, when they do construction, we're now finding that they should have gravel roads around the entire facility for fire protection. So if they have to build a gravel road around the entire panel facility, then there's obviously going to be an excess of loam, because you don't build it with loam. So, we got to be careful about how we word that, because then you can't expect them to take 500 or 1,000 yards of extra loam and now spread it over the site and change the topography. The idea is to
Right.
reuse the surface material, screen it and put it back where practical, So I have seen solar farms where they put crushed stone underneath as well, instead of loam and seed, which promoted better drainage. There might be a reason for that as well. So you have to keep your options open.
Well, it's also because of maintenance. In other words, if they're gonna put the loam back and, seed it down, now you've got,
Grass.
you're gonna have grass, you're gonna have,
Correct.
yeah, I'm sure it's probably a lot less expensive to put gravel back, stone back, rather than loam, so.
I think we're on the right track, because I think when you're seeing projects permitted, they're not talking about these types of issues. Fugitive dust and, it's pretty generic.
No,
They don't want-
they're waiting for the Board of Health to make that decision. Unfortunately, they're waiting for us to say, hey, wait a minute, you're violating all of these. I agree with, with what we're talking about. I think, yeah, like you said, Dave, we are going in the right direction. But that portion of this needs to be tweaked a little bit, I think.
I'll find some language on that, but it would be good to keep it simple and not
Yes.
make it a big math exercise. Just keep it common sense.
Okay, can I have something to say?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Bob.
I would feel that we should have a checklist of every board that's in town, that when a solar farm or anything like that comes about, that everybody's going to check out what they want to be done in that solar farm, of removal of soils, roads, how it's going to be set up. If there's lowlands, if they have to build it up to keep the water away from the solar farms. I mean, we should have a checklist of, like we do on other things, a checklist of saying what you can do or can't do, and this is our rules and regs that you're going to have to follow by. This way here, they're going to say, well, I don't know nothing about it. So at least if we had some kind of a little checklist,
Well,
like when I built my garage, I had to have a checklist from the building department, the Board of Health,
Yeah.
conservation, everybody had a checklist. And if they checked out everything okay, then you can go ahead with your project, because you already know what is entailed, what you have to do. And Tom Fortin should know that because he's a builder.
Well,
So-
I think that's actually in the application for the permit, I believe.
Right.
I think,
So this would get them now. So with this, they would be forced to have to apply to us and sit in front of the board and have a conversation about exactly what they're planning on doing.
The
with
reason
this.
why I'm looking at across from Joe, because my mic don't work here and I'm trying to run off of his computer right now.
I can
And
hear you.
my
It's
thing
working
is,
good. It's working for all of us.
Yeah,
so I'm
Yeah,
using Joe's computer to listen and talk to, and I'm using my computer to look at you guys over there. So my eyeballs are going back and forth over here.
you
So
don't have to
Bob,
look at us, just talk.
so
All
Bob,
right.
Joe's right that this application process brings them in front of the Board of Health. They have to present their work plan. We don't want to tell them how to do the job. We want them to tell us how they're going to do it, and then we can comment on
Right.
that. The plans, when they come to town hall, they still get circulated through the departments. It still goes through planning. It still goes through stormwater. It still goes through the Board of Health. It goes through the building department, conservation. They all sign off on it. So all that's still happening.
Okay, I have no problem.
I think you're covered. Yeah.
Yeah, section 7 has 6 items, bullet items listed there, or numbered items, and I think it covers everything, Bob. I think as a consultant, I'm looking at it, I'm reading it. I think I understand what I would have to do based on that list, so.
Yeah.
And then like Pat said, from there, we review and you can comment all you want, ask for more information. If they try and get by providing very little information, certainly the door is open there for more information to be asked. But there's definitely good direction there under section 7.
Yes.
There's nothing vague here. This is all really good stuff.
Yes, it is.
So I have a question, Pat, regarding, again, the thresholds. Let's just say there's a subdivision. I'll use the one that was just built. Joe, you know what I'm talking about, right? I can't remember the name. The Manise Estates.
Oh, yeah, yep.
How many acres do you think that is?
It was built on probably about 20 acres.
Okay.
I mean, it
Let's
was a
just say-
larger site,
All right,
but
so let's just say that that's our site. Let's just say it's 30 acres and it meets the threshold. My concern with, like, say they go in there and they're gonna wipe every tree off the face and start from scratch. They have a right to do that if it's, it's all upland and that's how they want to develop the site. So they meet the threshold. We have in here, no excavation, no removal of soil within 4 feet of the water table. So that concerns me, Pat, because when you build detention ponds, you're required to go 2 feet above the water table at the bottom of the pond. And you have to excavate out the lousy soil. So in layman's terms, to bring in better soil so that you get the pond to operate properly. So I don't know about this 4-foot groundwater separation. It makes sense for
A gravel pit.
a gravel pit, but I don't think it makes sense. I'd hate to get caught in some other type of development like that.
So,
Where the hands are tied because of that. So then they got to break it into 2 just to squeeze by us.
yeah.
And that's not the intent either,
So let me look into some exemption language for drainage structures for subdivisions.
Yep, exactly.
but drainage structures for these solar farms too, so.
Yep.
That's correct. That's a good point, Joe. You might have
Well,
some
they
of
all
the
are.
ponds, they're gonna have, detention ponds that by
12 inches.
DEP standards are gonna be 2 feet above water table. And we're telling them they can't go that deep. They got it, and but that's gonna require more fill. So it defeats the purpose.
So detention structures,
Yes. Detention, retention.
yep, infiltration. I got it. I
That was
wrote it down.
basically, that was to do with the pits that we
Yes.
had to
Yes,
feet above the water line. That way, if you did put a subdivision in, that you would be 4 feet above the water table, and then they can put in a septic. That was the whole
Correct.
of the 4 feet above. But if you're putting a solar farm, do you really need to be 4 feet above? Like Dave says, you got to go down 2 feet for the ponds.
Well, actually, in most of these solar farms, they're starting out with less than 4 feet.
Correct.
Right.
Some of them are starting out with 12 inches.
No kidding. Some of them are flood level.
So,
So just don't walk next to a solar farm that you know it's in wetlands because you're gonna get zapped.
yep. So, no, that's a good point. Well, I can fix that.
Eat what you think.
Another question, we're not gonna get caught with any cranberry bog work here, will we?
What do you mean?
Well, in cranberry bogs, you're gonna be into the water table with your, construction of them. I don't know if there are any places in town. I'd hate to see somebody have an issue because they have to remove material in order to create the bogs. I know there are some cranberry bogs here and there throughout the town, but we need some sort of exemption in there for farming activities.
Okay. As long as, I mean, my experience going back to the Kingston days of my construction career was that everybody was building cranberry bogs to get the sand.
Okay.
So, I guess you
I
could
think
build,
you're still doing that.
well, and the way they nipped that in the bud was to not allow them to take the material off site. If you wanted to dig down into groundwater to have a bog, you were going to build a stockpile somewhere on your site for the sand.
Okay.
So,
That's why a lot of these gravel pits today, sand pits, they're putting solar farms in because after the gravel's all gone and the sand's all gone, what are they gonna do with the property after?
right.
They're going right almost down into the water table so they can put solar farms now.
And they pay pretty good money, Bob.
Oh yeah, go down to Cape, you see a lot of solar farms where gravel pits were.
I live in a small town and we have 11 big ones. So,
There's quite a few down at Cape, so I mean, you're gonna need sand, you're gonna need for septics and all, the septics are not all gonna disappear. So you gotta get the sand from somewhere unless somebody's gonna make it up.
So where do we stand right now? How does everybody feel about what direction we're gonna go in with this type of setup?
I feel let Pat look into more of what David just mentioned about and correct a little more things in this there before we can make any decisions. That's my opinion.
Well, and I have a couple of more comments. One about a butter notification, section 9. I think we ought to be consistent with the DEP standards, which requires abutters within 100 feet of the property to be notified of any public hearing that we have.
green cards.
Green cards, yes.
Yeah.
Be providing all that, but
Yeah.
rather, I mean, it just says,
Just like conservation.
yes,
Yeah.
written notice and registered mail to all parties in interest. That should be more specific to any property owner within 100 feet of the property.
I'll fix that. I made a note.
Okay. And then the other concern I have is going back to
You're out
that,
of time, Dave.
I'm sorry? I'm
You're out
of
of time.
Good night. The groundwater, should we be putting a provision in for any activity that,
We don't even need the groundwater if you don't want it, but I was concerned about affecting future wells and things like that. Especially if somebody's going to import soil.
well, I guess my point with the groundwater, the concern with that is that, there's a lot of regulation already in play for groundwater. For instance, septic systems have to be 4 feet above. If you're repairing a septic, you can go to 2 feet, but you got to use denitrification. Stormwater management, separation, standard separations, 2 feet, et cetera, et cetera. I believe that, I think there's already enough in place. I just don't know what that whole statement really, what that intent, whoever wrote it on some other regulation in California, whatever. I don't see
No,
how.
I stole that. I stole that from the town soil board permit.
Okay,
With that, Dave, you're talking about groundwater regarding septic system, correct?
Correct, but I'm just trying to point out ground. Well, let me just.
I
throw
just
it out there.
highlighted it. I just highlighted it on the screen.
All right, so let me get to the point of the matter, okay? PJ Keating. they're already 350 feet below the groundwater, probably. I don't know what the number is, to be honest with you, but obviously, you know, they'd have been in operation for 100 years. Does this stipulation now say to them that they can't expand horizontally unless they're 4 feet above the water table? I don't see how that makes any sense. You're essentially shutting down their operation permanently, which means you're gonna put the town in the crosshairs of a major lawsuit. I agree they shouldn't be going any deeper than what they are now. Whatever they're at, that's it. They're done.
So-
And moving laterally is, I think they're right as a business owner to do that.
So
So-
they can move laterally
Correct.
and go to that depth that they're at, which is about 400 feet, I believe, 375 feet.
That's my point. I think they're grandfathered for what they're at is what my point is. I know that they supplied a plan to the select board, the soil board, that showed that they wanted to go down another crazy amount, like another 150 feet or some, you know, 3 more.
Another 300.
Okay, whatever it is, I'd say, you know, no way, you know, so I think, I don't know, if we put a grandfathering
So why don't we
clause
just take it out? Why don't we just take it out? It's already addressed in another regulation in town.
okay,
Yeah,
that's
but
fine
does
by
it
me.
apply, does it apply to that type of, you know, situation? So it applies to septic systems, it applies to that, but how do you use that as a regulation to a gravel pit?
It was only here to bolster the requirement in the soil board permit. It was just a backup.
No, but, right, so if you take that section out.
Yep.
They can go.
Well, they still have.
They're already at, I
If
think
it's a-
at some point, and I think Bob mentioned this way back, that they had a permit to go down 500 feet. That was something that was issued to them many years ago. So I don't know if that's still in compliance with them. We don't know that. I think that question was brought up before, and I don't know the answer.
There's been some legal opinions given on that, and we can't talk about that here.
I just if I might make one note, the only thing about having some sort of separation to the water table, and I certainly think that as a whole, the regulation would be able, as the board would be able to vary a little bit from that, but 4 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot, it does give you a little bit of safety in the event that there is a release of some sort of hazardous material. You are working in there with heavy equipment, and, you know, hydraulic lines break, fuel leaks, in case there's some sort of situation. Yeah, I mean, there's something about a groundwater separation I would suggest would be a good idea. It just is a little safety factor. That's the reason behind the septic system, but with maybe the ability to vary some, the board to vary some. You know, if we're going to remove right to the water table or below the water table, you know, the same thing goes for PJ Keating. They really have to pay attention to any releases that they have, because that would obviously go directly into the water that's there.
So how about I ask town council for a sentence on giving the Board of Health the ability to adjust that distance on a case-by-case basis?
That was just my opinion. I don't.
But you could get a waiver. The Board of Health can give you a waiver on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I would be more comfortable with the 4 feet being 2 feet, and then what you're saying, ask town council for some leeway, so that we can do it on a case-by-case basis, because there may be cases that we cannot think of right now that may come up in the future.
Okay.
So we can make some of these changes, and just directing that to the board, and have Pat, you know, make those contacts, make some of the changes.
Yep.
And I really think that, you know, we really need to get this at least advertised, you know, ASAP.
Well, I'd ask you to vote tonight to at least advertise it. and we can work out the.
But
tax.
can we advertise it without those changes, in other words? That's my.
You're not advertising the regulation. You're only running an ad that you're considering the regulation.
Put
You
that
will
back
have
up.
to advertise the entire regulation once it's complete.
Pat, put that one back up on the screen. That one, you had the legal ad, and it was
Yeah.
pretty generic, Tom. I think it just basically it alerted the general public that we're talking about the regulations. We're going to actually we have to set a date and time, and then the legal ad will run 2 consecutive weeks. I presume in what, the Advocate? What are we running legal? Where are we running it?
I think
So-
we have to run it.
Going to be, yeah, we're going to have to check that out. It's either going to be the Standard Times and the Advocate, or we might be able to do it online now also. Got to just double check that because the expense for that is great these days.
We'll have to take a mortgage out if we're doing it in the Standard Times.
Right.
It only has to be advertised
It's
one
all-
day in each
Right,
week.
one
days.
advertisement, that's it, one local paper, and I think the Advocate's the most inexpensive one. So, I mean, however you want to do it.
But don't you have to do it with 2? We've always done
No.
it with 2. 2 major
No.
papers.
Long as you advertise it in one directory, I don't think that's ever been an issue.
It says
Online.
1 day in each of 2 successive weeks. So 1 day each week for 2 weeks. The ad needs to run
Right, in one.
in one paper. Yeah.
I don't think you can do it online, Dave. I don't believe that would, I believe you have to do it.
I
don't know.
didn't suggest
Things
it
are
online.
changing now.
No,
I
that
think
was
Joe was suggesting that we could post it online as well. It's like a secondary way of advertising.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you put it on Facebook, everybody in the world will know about it.
Jesus.
Not me, I don't watch.
That's
I don't-
not legal. That's not a legal ad.
Are we
So
gonna
do we-
post it, are we gonna post this ad as just a draft, or are we gonna, I mean, if.
We're gonna pick a date, I hope.
A big pardon?
I would hope that we would pick a date, either a month down the line or 2 weeks down the line or 4,
Yeah,
Yes,
I believe we should definitely do that, and in 2 weeks would be a good number, I believe.
I can fix the language in 1 day.
All right, we could go back to Tuesday nights. We've been doing the Monday night thing for the butter on Gammons Road. So we could do 2 weeks from tomorrow if you could get the legal ad in the Advocate for this Thursday and next Thursday.
And then we would meet on the Tuesday after.
That's correct. So Bob, I'll read the legal ad. It's pretty generic. It's the Town of Acushnet Board of Health. Notice is hereby given under Chapter 111, Section 31C of the Massachusetts General Laws that the Town of Acushnet Board of Health will consider the adoption of rules and regulations for the control of atmospheric pollutions. The proposed regulations entitled Soil Removal Regulations is on file with the Town of Acushnet Board of Health and available for inspection during regular business hours. A public hearing on the adoption of the above referenced atmospheric pollution regulation has been scheduled for Tuesday, March, will that be the 30th? Beginning at, and then we'll put a time, 6 p.m. via Zoom. Info can be found on the Acushnet website, www.acushnet.mass.us. Board of Health, David Reagan, Sharon, Robin Medeiros, Thomas Fortin. And then it'll run 2 consecutive weeks.
That works for me.
I'll make that motion with the correct changes that Pat will apply to that.
Okay, and there's nothing that says that just because we get drafts, I don't think there's anything that says we can't tweak it again at the public hearing.
We can.
Based upon public comment or any board members' comment or what have you, we could tweak words, sentences, delete, add, we can do things like that. And then we just have to be very specific on that evening as to exactly what we're doing for changes if we're going to vote on it. And we could always continue for a week or what have you for the changes to be finalized if we had to. So it's not a, you know, we don't have a,
All right, well, my motion stands to follow through with that.
Hold
Okay,
on, Joe's got
Yeah,
something to say.
I just, we're saying it's got to be 14 days. It's got to be advertised 14 days ahead for at least 14 days ahead.
I
okay,
think that
My
gives us-
concern is getting it into the paper. You know, we can change it and modify it, but that 14 days doesn't leave us a lot of room for them to actually get it out there. It might be next week before the ad is actually put into the paper by the time that it actually comes out.
okay, I follow you, Joe. Unless you were to get it in tomorrow's, we can't meet 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Right? That's assuming the paper can get it in and actually
No, that's what-
distributed so that everybody can see it.
Well, if Joe gets the actual date on when they can publicize it, and then we can make a determination. When we can
No.
have.
I have an idea.
What's up, Pat?
Just post it, pick the tentative date. If the paper doesn't come out in time, you just reschedule the meeting.
Okay, but we could do 3 weeks from tomorrow, which is a Tuesday. That gives you until next Tuesday to run the first legal ad.
That should be plenty of time. I think the deadline on
I like
most of
that.
those are the Thursday. Thursday's a deadline for the next week. I believe that's how it works.
Wanda's saying yes. The
Can Wanda
Thursday.
keep track of these dates, please?
See? I did pay attention. I knew it.
Thank you, Wanda.
Thursday is the deadline.
So Joe, what day is 3 weeks from tomorrow? Is that April what?
3 weeks from tomorrow is April 6th.
Okay, so I have a motion on the floor to publish the legal ad, and we will do that for April 6th. We'll say 6 PM. And is there a second on the motion?
Second,
Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Fortin,
Yes,
Mr. Maderas,
yes.
and I'm a yes. It carries 3-0. So we will have a public hearing, invite comment from the public on April 6th, 6 PM regarding the regulations, and they'll be tweaked again, as we discussed this evening.
Yep.
But Pat Hannon, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
thank you,
Pat.
Pat.
You're relieved of your duties.
Are we
All right,
done?
next, we have one more thing on the agenda. Well, 2 more items. I'll go to Joe to talk about the vaccine clinic.
Well, we leave that on there at the moment. We have not been able to get the state to allow us to have a vaccination clinic in town. They have put all their eggs in the mass vaccination sites. Recently, there's been some conversation about homebound people getting vaccinated, and there's 2 sides to this. One, which is that the town could possibly have done it, or the state's going to do it in combination with help from the town. When we looked into, number one, the inability for us to get the vaccine and the state's requirement for what they considered a homebound person to be, we were talking about maybe a handful of people. They truly will not allow us to vaccinate homebound people that don't need at least 2 people to carry them out of a house. If they can have 1 person, or they can be mobile in any way, they want you to go to the mass vaccination sites. Again, so we gave that to the state to allow them to do it. If we get any phone calls, or we also know Heather Sylvia knows who some of them are, whether they be seniors or younger people that have serious mobility issues. we'll get them vaccinated through the state vaccination program that will be mobile, and that's starting this week and continuing from there on. But as for us, we're still waiting and we're still pushing and we're still asking anybody and everybody to talk to their state rep, talk to their senator, and push to get us to do it. We're willing to do it. We're ready to do it. We have everybody, including the paramedics and the Council on Aging, ready to rock and roll if we have to. We've done all the steps that we need to do to get it to go, but the state refuses to allow us to do it. They have all their, like I said, all the eggs are in one basket right now, and that's the mass vaccination clinics. The CVSs are being federally funded directly. Well, not funded money-wise, but funded with the vaccine. The Walgreens and some of the other pharmacies are working with the state still. But you can go online right now, and it doesn't matter what group you're in or what phase you're going to be in, but you can go online now to the mass.gov, and then I don't know the exact one, but you'll find it. Go to the vaccination, and you can sign up now to get vaccinated. And what they'll do is they'll actually send you when it comes to your turn in regards to when you can be vaccinated. When there's an appointment that becomes available, they will email you and or call you to allow you to be able to pick and choose when that might be. It might be months down the road, it might be weeks down the road, but the state's new portion of their vaccination website allows you to do that right now. So you don't have to worry about when you're going to get in. They'll just tell you when you can.
Okay.
Other than that's where we're at.
Thank you, Joe.
Sure.
Next on the agenda, we have tobacco sale regulations for, it says 2020, but we're in 2021. And again, these are regulations that we have, some of them we have to change just to match the state regs. And then there are other parts of them which we don't have to adopt. And we should really move this along because this started, I guess, in 2020, September of 2020.
Yep.
So does anybody want to start, Bob or Tom?
I'm still reviewing it, and I think, there's some of the state things that we have to follow through with, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, but there are a lot of the other things that I disagree on. So I don't know if you want to possibly postpone it till the next meeting.
I don't know. I personally would like to get it behind me.
So,
But if you need more time, I guess we can go to the next meeting.
so basically the state requirements that we have to follow, can we vote on just that tonight? I think we can.
Joe, what's your
Yeah,
thought?
I mean, certainly we can modify the regulations. It's, again, we have outdated regulations and we're really just looking to update them. But yes, I would prefer, I think, to make sure that we pull out any of those green items in there, so to say, and leave it all with the yellow, and then give it to you, yeah, and have you look at it. I mean, this is something.
So tonight we can basically adopt the requirements from the state that are mandatory.
It's going to be a regular.
Yellow. It's all in yellow, highlighted.
Yes, yeah, it's
Right.
basically, it's a whole base, and yeah, you could definitely do that, but it's still a regulation, so you're still gonna have to go through the same process that you have to go through with the soil regulations. You're gonna have
So
to
we-
advertise it.
Okay.
Again,
Yeah, I mean, so it's because it's an updated regulation, but it's really a new regulation at the same time.
Do you think we get some sort of rebate if we ran it with the soil?
Yeah, right.
I think you'll have a long night.
Can we put that in with the soils underneath it and have only one?
You would
Yeah,
have
they're
it
gonna-
the same
They're
night.
gonna
That's what I'm
charge
talking-
you, they're gonna charge you for both. You're not gonna be able to do that.
Oh,
What a
oh.
ripoff. I mean, everybody's trying to rip
Oh,
us
I
all
get
off
you.
here.
I'm more worried about how long the night could be when you guys have your hearing on it.
Well, that's what we're trying to straighten out now. So basically, if we adopt, so we have to advertise again to
Yes.
adopt to make that change, to make the
Yes.
change even with the state part.
Yes,
Right.
yeah, because you're making a Acushnet Board of Health tobacco
Right.
regulation.
Right. We're changing the regulation that we currently have.
Yes.
To be stringent, much more stringent.
Well, it's to not to be so much more. It is much more stringent, but it follows the state.
Jonathan, I can't understand one thing. They took away menthol cigarettes. You can go right over into Fall River, just over the border, and get all the menthol cigarettes you want. And you're giving the state of Rhode Island tax dollars instead of keeping it into our tax dollars. They're giving away thousands and thousands of dollars to another
Millions.
state just over the line, and you can go there and buy tobacco that's menthol and all that. I just don't understand it.
It's done. The state did it. That's
We
the
we
thing.
don't have any jurisdiction over that. That's why that's my question for this evening. So what is the direction we can take right now?
I can reprocess this, check in with the Tobacco Coalition, who also is part of the state, make sure that we're good to go and get just a straight regulation without any additional, a straight new regulation without any potential additional language from the Board of Health.
Right.
That's what I would like.
I'm really concerned about the fining, and there's a lot of things in there that I just don't agree with, especially the fines. That
The
state,
fine? The fine, Tom, is a state fine. We can add on lower fines. There's another section in there. So the state fines out at $1,000 a whack now. The
Right.
local Board of Health does not have to fine that way. There's a section in there where we can put our own fines. Which
But
I think is in there right now.
if the state comes in and does an investigation and goes to a place, and they're in violation, they're gonna use their fine, not ours. That's how that is.
Yes,
But
but
the state comes in.
one of the things that happens is our inspector, Joe Cavallo, actually is also the state inspector.
So that was my question is, can he impose that fine, or is that I'm pretty sure that's up to the Board of Health, to impose the fine. We don't have to follow the amount that they use it on the state. That's my question.
Right.
We,
But if he's fining for the state, so when they go out and they do inspections, he does it two different ways. I mean, one time he's doing stuff for the state, and one time he's doing it locally for the Board of Health. Yes, there's some cross there, but if there's an issue and he wants, he feels as though that there's been a violation and he would want to issue a fine, he would bring that to you.
right. So in other words, that's my point. I just disagree with using those amounts that the state imposes, because you might as well just put people out of business. I know.
Joe, do we,
Go ahead, Dave.
I agree with Tom on putting people on, where it says violations, page 12. Do you have it with you?
I do.
I mean, so everything yellow, highlighted yellow there, it talks about those big fines, which I'm not in favor of at all. You're saying that we have like the yellow, that's one piece of yellow that I don't really like. We can't strike that from the regulations altogether?
I am going going to verify that. That's why I want to be
You know
able
what?
to,
I want to make a motion that we table this to the next meeting. We need to review this because there's too many things involved. Too many things involved and the fines and everything that the state's saying, yes, okay, I agree. We have no choice, but we still have the other things that we have to review. So I'm going to make a motion that we table this tobacco regulation to the next meeting.
I make a second on that.
Okay, will that be the same meeting as our,
Or we can, I'll amend that. I'll make a motion to table it to another meeting. I don't really want to have it go
okay.
with the soil deal because that's gonna just go into whatever. So in other words, we'll have to come up with another meeting, in other words, on another night.
yeah, well, I actually meet with them tomorrow. And I'll get you some more, I'll get it a little clearer in regards to what we can and can't do there.
That,
Okay, well, I'll get to the motion in a second. I know there's a motion on the floor, seconded. I'm in the discussion phase of that motion. I just want to point out, Joe, that like, just eliminating all the green, I'm in favor of eliminating all the green, but not the section that talks about the fines, because we need that piece of green in there because that's where the lower fines are, which are current now, and not the yellow above, which are the ridiculous, out of line, out of touch, shut people down state fines.
Yes.
I want to, that's the one section of this whole thing where that might be the only green that I'm willing to agree with, quickly
Yeah.
running through it. And,
And
but I also don't want that yellow in there. I don't want in our regulations, any of these fines. So
that
we
was
need
my
to-
point. That was my
Okay.
point in the beginning.
Yep, I understand. I understand what you mean. It really like all of A, B, and C under one should come out and two should slide up.
Yes, exactly. So the
Yeah.
status quo is
Yep.
we're holding the line with the status quo. I mean, the biggest component of the state change basically is 21 years of age now. And we
And all the
technically,
flavors and the
flavors, yeah.
vaping and all that. Yep, sure.
but that's all stuff that's banned by the state.
Yes.
We're not going to be doing anything above what the state's already done.
No.
That's kind of all I'm interested in doing here. I don't really want to go through all these other extremes because I'm not aware of any issues we have in town, and
We don't.
okay. All right, well, there's a motion, there's a second. All in favor, roll call vote, Mr. Fortin,
Yes,
Mr. Maderas,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Vote carries 3-0. Continue discussion to a further dated meeting, and Joe will provide us with a cleaned up copy of all that mumbo jumbo.
I
think-
agree.
And I have that. That's fine, right?
Yep.
Is there anything else to discuss, Joe? I don't see anything on the agenda.
Nope, that was where we were at tonight.
Okay,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, roll call vote, Mr. Fortin,
Yes.
Mr. Maderas,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. We're now adjourned at 6:38. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.